Hi, I'm Ben Wicker, Executive Director of the Indiana Agriculture Nutrient Alliance, as well as a farmer and certified crop advisor here in East Central Indiana. I'm going to talk a little bit today about what are the 4 R's of nutrient management and why they're important to our farms, the agriculture industry as a whole, as well as the environment and society. When we think about nutrients, it's important to understand that there's many different fates that those nutrients can take. And in this simplified example, we're really focused on nitrogen and phosphorus. And obviously our ideal fate for these nutrients is to be taken up by the plant or held in the soil where it can be utilized by the soil or used by growing crops later on. But we also know that we can lose those nutrients to the atmosphere or through erosion and runoff or through leaching and through tile water as well. So it's really important that we consider when we're making our fertilizer and manure applications, what are the steps and what are the actions that we can take to ensure that we're being as efficient as possible. So out of that was developed the 4 R's of nutrient management. And the 4 R's are a scientifically based framework that take a look at when making fertilizer manure applications that we're considering the right source of nutrients applied at the right time, at the right rate, in the right place. And it's a framework that really looks to make nutrient applications that maximize that plant uptake and minimize that risk of environmental loss. Now, obviously, this framework is going to be cropping system specific, and it's going to be adaptable to all farms. So the 4 R's for your operation may differ from an operation that is in a different part of the state, utilizing a different crop, or maybe even down the road. These strategies are important because they align so well with the goals that we've established at the Indiana Agriculture Nutrient Alliance, particularly those goals around regularly performing soil sampling, implementing plans for nutrient management, considering the timing of our nutrient applications, and all that pointing to also utilizing those practices that are going to enhance the soil health of our farms as well. When developing a 4R nutrient management plan, it's really kind of boils down into these 4 key steps. Do we understand what our soil needs are? Do we understand what the crop needs are? Can we make those applications using 4R principles that are going to maximize plant uptake and minimize risk of nutrient loss? And then ultimately documenting what we've done. So diving individually into each of the 4 R's, we'll start with source. So this is really matching our fertilizer type to our crop needs and really thinking about what is the nutrient analysis of what we're applying and what is the form of those nutrients. Now, particularly if we're going to be utilizing manures or other organic forms of fertilizer, this may require us doing a test of that, taking a sample and performing a test, sending that off to a lab and understanding what is the nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium makeup of that. If it's a commercial fertilizer, it's understanding what the analysis, what the blend is, as well as what the form is. So with nitrogen, is it primarily in an ammonium form or a nitrate form? Is it urea versus anhydrous? Understanding the differences in the fertilizer type and how that's going to impact both plant uptake and how that fertilizer is going to behave in the environment. When thinking about rate, this is matching that crop or matching that fertilizer and manure to the crop needs. And really, we can boil this down into a pretty simple calculation that obviously is going to be a lot more complicated when it comes time to applying it, but it's knowing what those crop needs. So how much of each particular nutrient would that crop need, minus what that soil contribution is. And then that can help us determine what our fertilizer rate is. So for example, if we know that we need roughly 210 pounds in Northeast Indiana based on Purdue testing to raise the most economic corn crop that we can. We will take that 210 pounds, figure out what our ideal timing is, what our fertilizer source is, and from there we can calculate back our fertilizer rate. Now we can make adjustments to that if we know that we're going to get greater soil contributions from particularly high organic matter soils or soils that have received, a legume cover crop or, have something happening different with that. But that's an example of the type of calculations that we need to work through as we're determining what that right rate for those crops would be. Right place is another one of the right R's, and this is keeping the nutrients where the crops can use them. And we can think about place in, a lot of different scales. So at a field level scale, it's applying nutrients only where they need them. And so think about, doing our soil sampling, whether that's through a grid or a zone, and checking for what those potassium, phosphorus, other nutrient levels are, and seeing we have variability across that field that we can both vary our rate or maybe even application at all. When we think about that at a much smaller scale, in the row, it may be the placement of that fertilizer. So thinking about starter fertilizers, are we placing that nutrient in the furrow or, beside the row on a 2x2 setting? It also may be thinking about our dry fertilizer applications. Are these going to be surface applied nutrients? Or are we going to incorporate them through banding or some other form in underneath the soil? As we think about place, it's important to think about it at all the different scales that it may be important. And finally, right time is important as well, making sure those nutrients are available when the crop needs them. This is going to be critically important on that soil crop weather interaction, as well as the form of those nutrients as well. We have to consider plant uptake and the risk of loss of those nutrients. So this is important when thinking about, for example, developing a nitrogen timing strategy. So if we have soils that are, particularly coarse, if we know that we're going to have warm, wet weather, and we don't have a growing crop out there, we may want to delay our nitrogen applications to closer to planting time or even within season. Same with other nutrients, knowing that if we have extremely heavy rainfall in the forecast, that may not be the time to broadcast or make that surface application of manure directly in front of that rainfall. So considering the timing of those nutrient applications, what the conditions and environment is going to be like for successful plant uptake following that application is going to be critically important. So some ways in Indiana that we're really looking to quantify and validate 4 R's of nutrient management is around a brand new or recently launched program here to Indiana statewide, which is called Indiana 4R certification. This is a voluntary certification that was led by our Agribusiness Council of Indiana, and it's specifically geared towards nutrient service providers. So those ag retailers, consultants, others that provide service and recommendation to farmers around proper 4R nutrient use. This program was launched statewide in November of 2020, and the focus of the program is a third-party audit that ag retail or ag business location goes under that audits against the training, the recommendations, application, and documentation that they're using around their fertilizer and manure practices, and ensuring that the 4R best 4R practices are being implemented by that location. Now in Indiana, we've already had 4 locations that piloted this effort for us at our launch before there in last November. 2 of those are actually within the Western Lake Erie Basin, Helena Agri Sciences in Bern, as well as the Andersons in DeKalb County. Crop fertility specialist and White River Co-op in other parts of the state also participated in the pilot program and achieved their year 1 certification. Those 4 locations account for more than 110,000 acres that we can now certify and understand are utilizing for our nutrient management practices when working with their farmers and other clients in the state. So I hope this was a good primer for everyone as far as what are the 4 R's of nutrient management, some ideas of how they can be applied to their farms, and some efforts that are taking place in Indiana to really validate and certify how Indiana businesses that work and deal with fertilizers and manures are ensuring that those best practices are being in place. I look forward to taking any questions that you may have, and thanks for your time.
All right, any questions? Well, Emily, any questions, Emily?
All right, thanks for that, Ben. Does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, I think I got a question on that. When they do the fertilizer application after rain or the sun and that could bake some of that, have they had any issues with application loss there at that time?
application following a rain.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Um, so from my perspective,
Not
the biggest,
necessarily muddy
yeah. So
conditions.
the biggest risk is probably, with a heavy rain, particularly on surface application, just moving that product off site, right? So
Mhm.
runoff, erosion, that sort of thing, as well as, by design, most of our fertilizers are pretty water soluble. That makes them readily available to plants, but
Mhm.
if you have a really heavy rain immediately following that, uh, that can be an issue, right? If we have a lot of surface runoff,
Yeah.
as well as leaching down through. Um, as far as hot sun, hot temperatures afterwards, um, the scenario that I think I would think about that would be something not necessarily tied to rain, but an application like with a urea, that is really at risk of volatilization after application if it's not stabilized um, at all, and making an application on a hot windy day especially, you could lose quite a bit of that nitrogen to the atmosphere before it has a chance to be taken up. In that situation, you actually kind of want a rain, a, 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 a not a heavy rain, but a nice
Yeah.
soaking rain, anyways,
Yeah.
to get it in.
Lately that's all we've got is a light soaking rain.
Yeah,
So doesn't look so good. It looks like a drought to me.
yeah. I know you guys up there are. You could use a few more showers. I know up.
Yeah, I work in a lot of clay soil, so I got to watch the runoff when it
Yeah.
does because it'll take my topsoil out
Yep.
if we get
Yep.
a heavy one. But the light rains haven't been that bad, but it does get kind of hot when you get
Yeah.
into the different of it where the clouds run through and they're gone. It
Yep.
doesn't take long to turn to steam.
Yep. 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 And steams it off, and so it would be probably more your nitrogens and that volatilization, or denitrification risk. If it's in the Ron, you're going to have to check me here. It's if it denitrification in the ammonium form, right? Isn't that where we?
Denitrification occurs from nitrate, actually, mostly. That's more
By the-
volatilization with ammonia.
With
So,
the ammonium. Okay. Yep.
All
This
right.
is why we have the PhD and professors here to
Bring them on.
Yeah.
gut check me on all the forms that I should remember.
Close enough.
It's all right.
Complex process.
You just do the best you can. That's all you can do.
That's right.
I like that attitude, Walter. Cool. Well, thanks for
So-
that info, Ben. So now that we have a nice background about what 4R is and sort of the a nice foundation of it, I think this next video we're going to hear is from Dr. Ryan Lee, who's an agronomist, and he's going to kind of do a little explanation about how these sort of principles can be applied to your farm. And we will again be able to sort of chat about this afterwards.
All right.
Here's what 4R says it is. It's best management practices that optimize the efficiency of fertilizer use. It matches nutrient supply with crop requirements, minimizes nutrient losses, and it varies by location. What I'm hearing in there is local knowledge. I'm hearing an efficiency conversation. I'm hearing an economic conversation, return on investment, a sustainability conversation. And so the question is then, how does 4R, how do these four right things then play in to an agronomic conversation? Jen, thank you. All right, go ahead. So employing 4R in agronomy, where do I see this to fit in? Well, 4R creates a space for us to have efficiency conversations, not just talking about yield, okay? So this is where we have an opportunity to walk the farmer through all of their inputs and their outputs and say, hey, look, we can make your farm more profitable, not just on the output side. It renews the importance of education, all right? So many of you have been in agriculture longer than I have, and you have seen this happen. So every year, a new piece of technology is rolled out, and it requires a whole new set of education. Well, what happens is the old stuff gets forgotten about. And then a few years go by, and all of a sudden, what was old is now new again, and we're touting it as the latest, greatest thing. And the reality is, it's old, right? But it's been forgotten. So 4R gives us an opportunity to constantly renew that education. I think 4R is a platform to discuss, new technologies and new techniques that allow us to apply local knowledge and site-specific agriculture to be more efficient with our fertilizer. And then finally, I really feel like 4R is an opportunity to give a peek behind the curtains to what a farmer's really interested in. I honestly believe that farmers are interested and have an ethic about their farms. And they know what looks good, and they know that they want to look good in comparison to the neighbors and to those who drive by. They want their farms to be sustainable. 4R is a way for us to show the general public that that's occurring. All right, so what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to take us through what would be a winter sales meeting for us. And I want you to hear the 4 R's in this conversation that we have with salespeople, or with our salespeople and with our farmers, all right, this time of year. And so just to show you that it's not a whole lot new. So one conversation that I love to have during this time is a nitrogen use efficiency conversation. So for those of you who don't know, who aren't in row crops, so nitrogen use efficiency would be our nitrogen in pounds divided by our corn yield. Okay, so it's an NUE is what we get. And what you want is a small number. The smaller the number goes, the more efficient the program. And the goal is this. You want to maximize NUE without giving up yield and without giving up economics. Okay? So again, it's a whole program approach to your farm and trying to be more efficient. All right, so how do we talk about this? Well, this is a figure that comes out of the University of Illinois. There's a professor named Fred Below who does some of this work, and he's done this several times. The reference is down there in the corner. So let me explain this figure because it's complicated, but it's really cool. All right, so what he does is he plants corn, and then he goes out there and he harvests the above ground tissue, and he sends it into the lab, and he asks them to tell him the amount of each nutrient and its percent by weight for each different tissue. And so you start off, when you plant corn, you've only got a leaf sheath and a little bit of stalk, and so that's what he gets. That's the yellow band that runs through there. And then as the plant begins to grow, then you start to get leaf tissue, and you can see the green underneath that. That's leaf tissue, and this is nitrogen. All right, so this is the movement of nitrogen into the plant. And you can see the percent of the total. You can see the pounds per total. Later, you get into reproductive tissues. That's kind of the purpley pink color there. And then finally, you get the grain, and that's what actually leaves the farm, okay? Here's the take-home from Fred Below's work, all right? So first of all, there's this constant uptake of nitrogen throughout the entire season, all right? And then when you get to grain, then what you see is the purple grain starts to pull nitrogen out of the tissues that it's collected it in throughout the entire season. So this is reallocation of nitrogen. This is why we say nitrogen is mobile in the plant and mobile in the soil. There's this chunk of reallocated nitrogen. But one of the interesting parts is that there is still, even out very late in corn development, there is still potential for that corn to take nitrogen out of the environment. All the way out here to R6, that's black layer, okay? So what's even more interesting is Fred Below's done this work for many years. This is the same figure done back in the 90s. This is older hybrids, right? Look way out there on the right-hand side at the top of that figure and compare it to the more modern hybrids. And what you see is that modern hybrids take up more nitrogen late than an older hybrid. And so I've made a bar graph here for you. An old hybrid around tassel period had taken up 80% of its total nitrogen, whereas a new hybrid is just getting started, just a little over half. If we look out at R5, okay, the old hybrids, they're done. They're not taking up any more nitrogen. New hybrids are. All right, bottom line is modern hybrids require more nitrogen, and they require it later. Go back to Aldo Leopold's work from the 1940s. Are we improving the pump, or are we improving the well? Okay. So, and then also, how do we take advantage of that genetic potential? All right. So I'm gonna show you our potentials for nitrogen application. This, for those of you who do not know, the brown there on the bottom, that's soil. I always get some kickback from the guys over in Illinois because it's not dark enough for them to recognize that it's soil. But that is soil and that is sky. And this right here, before you've planted, that's your most wide window, your most wide opportunity to put down some nitrogen. So that'd be pre-plant nitrogen. At some point, thank you, Jen. At some point, we're going to get a plant that comes up, and it's going to be about 5 leaves. That's our opportunity for side dress. That was the first NUE that we had from corn production. Right, was the split application of nitrogen. Don't put it all on up front. Split it. Put some on as a side dress. But what we know is that even the stuff that we put on at side dress has got to deal with 3 months worth of weather, nitrate leaching through the soil, and oh, by the way, there's Fred Belo's work behind it, as is that nitrogen uptake potential. And so the question is, now you're going to get out here to tassel with a modern hybrid. Is there enough nitrogen left to finish off that modern hybrid and get the kind of yield that you expect? Did we do an efficient job with that nitrogen? Right? So, got a couple opportunities. There's pre-plant nitrogen. That's our widest window, but it's also our lowest efficiency on nitrogen. It's the most susceptible to leaching, most susceptible to volatilization, conversion to organic. There's a little window there at planting, and we'll use that. We'll put some nitrogen on at planting. There's split application, side dress, and that was introduced as a way to make nitrogen more efficient. All right, but the reality is that even nitrogen applied there's got to last 80, 90 days. All right, so what are the levers? So, at the panel this morning, Robert kept talking about levers, and I thought that's interesting because that's kind of how I see it as well. Is what are the levers that we can use to adjust our nitrogen use efficiency? And the first would be just rate and time. That's split application. Fertilize less, do it more often. There's a source, so can you stabilize that nitrogen? There's a variety of technologies that have come on board that are aimed at improving our nitrogen use efficiency. So things like nitropyrin or MBPT or DCIP, okay, all of those I would kind of slide them under source. There's the ability to protect nitrogen in other ways, so something like a humic acid. Then there's just the selection of our nitrogen type. Which one do we use? Anhydrous or urea, treated urea, UAN. All of these levers can be used to adjust our NUE. So let me give you an example. Everybody kind of likes pictures. And I mentioned this to the Lieutenant Governor this morning as well. So this is a study. This is a study that our former agronomist, Emily Swartz, has done. In fact, a lot of this work is Emily Swartz. I should give her credit for that. So this is a study that was done in Champaign County, Illinois. This is Parkland College. The community college. They do some work for us. On the left-hand side is 180 pounds of nitrogen applied pre-plant in Champaign County. On the right-hand side, what we did was we peeled back our nitrogen. Now we're down 15 pounds less nitrogen, still pre-plant. But what we did was we brought in a nitrogen protectant, a nitrogen stabilizer, and look at the difference between those two crops, all right? So this is one of those things where it's kind of difficult to measure health, but by golly, you know it when you see it, right? The right-hand side, much healthier. By the way, notice that we did not change yield. It's 195 bushels, maybe one more bushel on the right-hand side, but the NUE is drastically better. We went from like a 0.92 to a 0.84 nitrogen use efficiency, all right? Here's a similar study. This one's done in Terre Haute, Indiana. So here the yellow is all pre-plant 240 pounds of nitrogen put on up front in the form of UAN. The red, we peeled back 45 pounds of nitrogen, and we brought in nitrogen protection, nitrogen stabilization, okay? Still all pre-plant. The orange is now a split, 240 pounds, but we split it. We put half on it up front, half on as a side dress. And then the blue would be a combination of both. We split it, and we brought in our nitrogen protectant and our nitrogen stabilizer. Again, I don't have to have yields up here for you able to look at that drone picture and decide which treatment is which treatment and which one is more efficient, okay? All right, so we've talked about pre-plant, at-plant, side dress nitrogen, but look, there's this whole other section of corn development that we're not talking about. Opportunities for technology to step in and, again, make us some improvement on the way that we use nitrogen. All right, so what about late vegetative and reproductive? All right, so for those of you who don't know, those two fellas right there are standing in V10, V12 corn. And I heard Ben talk about trying to side dress some really late corn in 2019, right? Yeah, okay, so can we do something at that period that brings in some more nitrogen and, you know, again, spoon feeds nitrogen and spreads it out? And the answer is, well, there's time and place. There's things like foliar nitrogen sources. There's wide drop technology. So this is a study that we did in our research farm in Huntington last year, where all we did was we just put on a mid or late vegetative foliar nitrogen, and we went from 200 bushels to 209 bushels. That was a gain of about 3 to 5% in NUE, all right? Simple return on investment, simple return on efficiency, okay, but it does, what's the requirement? Requirement is a high clearance spray machine. What do we got? Is there equipment sitting around that the farmer's not using at this period that they can step in and do this sort of stuff? The answer is economically it works, okay? So Emily, like I pointed out Emily Swartz earlier, and she's done a lot of this work for us. So we have a protocol that we, how do we get farmers to adopt something like this? So the protocol that she's run is she takes a farmer, and so that's up there in that upper left-hand corner, a farmer standard. If you're in agriculture, if you're growing corn, there are a million ways to put nitrogen on, okay? So in that square, a lot of different applications, a lot of different technologies going on there. We just group them as farmer standard. And we take one of that farmer's field and we ask if on the right-hand side they just do one 4R thing, okay? So can they split? Maybe they're already splitting. Maybe we split a third time. Maybe they bring in an N protection. Maybe they bring in some sort of stabilization. Maybe it's a foliar nitrogen application. Okay, some sort of NUE step on the right-hand side of that farm. And then down below, right, so now we have all of these companies that are selling fungicides that are put on through airplanes. So we talk an airplane to apply half of that field. And what we get out of it is 4 treatments. We get a farmer standard with some sort of airplane treatment or some high-rise, high-clearance ground treatment. And then on the right-hand side, we get our 4R and our 4R plus a reproductive treatment. Okay, so does it work? Jen, can you click me? Yeah, so dark blue, that's our farmer standard. We're getting average about 200 bushels. You can see our NUE is around 1.1, so that's 1.1 pound of nitrogen for every bushel of corn they're making. If we pull one lever, one new NUE lever, we've moved our yield up and our NUE down. We've become more efficient with nitrogen. Again, we pull one NUE, we just do a foliar treatment late. We've improved our NUE and our yield. And what if we do all 4? Well, there's a compelling evidence to do all 4. We had 27 trials, improvement of 27 bushels, 21 trials, 27 bushel increase, and a 27% increase in UE since 2017. A lot of sevens. You know, it's a compelling story for farmers, and again, based off of how do we use 4R to make the farm better. Okay, I got about 5 minutes here, so I got a little bit of a break. Are there questions in the chat or anything like that, Jen? Okay, I'm going to kind of zoom through this because I don't want to just leave us with this, you know, this nitrogen. 10. Okay, Jen's telling me I can have longer. Never tell a professor that you got longer. Okay, so I don't want to just leave us with nitrogen. Someone earlier had asked, are we concerned about nitrogen or are we concerned about phosphate? And I think the answer is yes. You know, we're concerned about efficiency and ability. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our dry fertilizer. Okay, so this again comes from Fred Below. That's the same chart that Fred Below has put together, and I put it now into a table. This is 230 bushel corn from the University of Illinois, and what you can see is that the nutrients in that grain neatly group themselves. Something that you need hundreds of pounds of, that's a macronutrient, that's your large tag, right? Something that you need dozens of pounds for, that's your secondary macronutrient, that's your medium tag, and then something that you need less than a pound of, it's a micronutrient. Let me just point out real quick, because you know, I don't know if we think about this, but every time we talk about grain exports, this table comes to my mind. And I can see those nutrients sitting in a barge moving to another country. I mean, it's a really efficient pump. And so, you know, we need to think about, if we're really seriously into this global movement of food, I mean, we're shipping a lot of nutrients around. So what I want to do is show you how some of these things might interplay. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at phosphorus and potassium up there in your primary macronutrients. I'm going to pull in sulfur as a secondary macronutrient and just show you one of the micronutrients and how these things interact to make things more efficient. All right, the first is when you only need, you know, like a half a pound of something for a 230 bushel crop, how do you spread that? Well, one way of spreading it is putting in some dry granules and spreading that over the farm. The other way is impregnating that on all of those NPK particles. And it turns out, this is a study from Purdue in 2002, and it turns out that doing impregnation on our NPK particles is more efficient from a yield perspective, okay? It increases our coverage, right? And it increases our yield. So which one does this pull? I don't know. It's right time, it's right rate, it's right place, it's right source, okay? So there's just, you know, putting the nutrient where it needs to be, when it needs to be there, in the right rate is an improvement. Secondary macronutrient. All right, so sulfur. Why should sulfur be part of an NPK program? Why should S be part of your P and your K? And the answer is, well, we have sulfur deficiencies these days, but not only that, sulfur increases our efficiency of phosphorus. So when we spread sulfur, we get more out of our phosphorus. Increases the availability of things like our zinc and our manganese, and some of the sources like gypsum can improve soil structure. All right, so I'm sure if you've been in grain agriculture for very long, you've seen this figure, but this is sulfur concentration in the soil from 1985 on the left-hand side to 2016 on the right-hand side. And the reality is we get less sulfur from the air than what we used to get. And so we got to compensate for that. And when we do, you know, we win from an efficiency, as I'll show you. So sulfur improves our nitrogen use efficiency. It's again a study where we have 3 different rates of nitrogen. That's a different colored bars. So in this case, we didn't put any nitrogen down in that with the dark green, and we got 63 bushels of corn. Okay, but if you take that no nitrogen and you just add some sulfur to it, all of a sudden the yield goes up. Right, so you have increased the efficiency of nitrogen. You can see that at every level of nitrogen. Sulfur also increases the efficiency of our of our phosphorus. And so this is percent phosphorus uptake with increasing rates of not phosphorus, but sulfur, okay? And this is saying that we get an increase in our phosphorus uptake capacity. All right, and one last one here. So this is our variable rate fertilizer recommendation. Again, we talked about this on the panel as well. This comes from our research farm in Huntington this year. And what we did to make that figure was we pulled yield, we pulled in soil tests, and we pulled in some soil characteristics like EC, electrical conductivity, to build that map. All right? What we've got is an average map spread of about 35 pounds per acre, a maximum of 190, okay? If a farmer is going to flat rate, what are they going to flat rate? 100 pounds? What's our efficiency gain from a flat rate to a variable rate? Okay? It's an easy return on investment. Okay? The same is true of potash. Okay? It just requires some education and some time for us to walk through this equation. All right. So if we put it all together, again, this is a replicated plot that we got from our research farm in Huntington. I got a couple of different fertilizer mixes here. The yellow is 200 and 200. 200 pounds of MAP, 200 pounds of potash. We got 234 bushels of corn replicated 4 times in that farm in Huntington. We could do this. I've got multiple locations of this, but this one happens to come from Huntington. When we brought in those micros in a dry blend, right? We did get an increase. We got another bushel because corn needs micros, right? The problem is we didn't take advantage of all the efficiencies that we could have. So in the custom blend, we'll start with the light blue. That's 400. That's an equivalent of 400 pounds. We have not reduced any fertility here, but what we've done is we've used our impregnation. We've used nitrogen protectant, nutrient protectants, and we've brought in some sulfur. You can see the increase from straight fertilizer goods to a custom blend. We can use that efficiency to dial back the amount of fertilizer that we put on. In the dark blue, that's 350 pounds of total nitrogen. We've carved out 50 pounds of total fertilizer, okay? Depends on how you count. Some farmers will put a flat spread of 100 and 150 or 200 and 200, but we're in the neighborhood of 6 to 25, 24% increase in efficiency when we put all of those together. Okay, that's a value of compounding our 4Rs. All right, so I'm going to leave you again with Aldo Leopold. He says that conservation can accomplish its objectives only when it springs from an impelling conviction on the part of the private landowner. What we got to do as agronomists is have compelling stories, right? I think these things are easy to come across, but once something is compelling, farmers are going to adapt, and they're going to take that and put that as part of their farm. And I think that's when we start to get real wins, right? Those are changes that happen at the heart of the landowner. So from there, I don't know if there's any questions or comments on the screen, but I think I'm pretty close to time.
All right. Well, I think that was a pretty good compliment to Ben's introduction to 4R. Kind of gave us a little bit more information about how just everybody can use the 4R principles on their farm and sort of how that all works into a more practical setting. So if anybody has any questions, unfortunately, we do not have Dr. Lee with us. But with our powers combined, we may be able to answer some questions about his presentation.
Yeah, I do remember the difference in the nitrogen when they changed it in 2006 when they changed the emulsionation of fuel, which did away in there. You could see the difference in it. I have seen the difference of that because when I started farming, I had to have a lot of fertilizer, and I've cut back the rates on a lot of it. And now I notice the difference of that not the sulfur loss. Now I have tested the soil and had to work with a co-op, having them spread different levels to try to get my farm exactly where it needed to be. I didn't see any when they were doing their yield based on what they projected, never changed that much. And I don't know if it was more weather related at the time, that following their examples correctly of doing the sampling and doing the actual testing, I didn't gain much more out of that field either way. The only thing I was short on at that time would have been lime, and that was because it had to be done before or after the crop was gone. And I don't know if that was the bigger factor, because I do notice the neighbors using a lot more lime in their fields in that. And I didn't want to mess with their setup that they had based on what their formulas were. But I did not see much of a gain in that segment a year that they did. So I rely a lot more. I've been putting a lot less fertilizer on and going with a more profitable seed that uses a little less nitrogen. And I got to kind of go with where I can try to figure out where that seed needs it. I don't have a drying system in my field or with my operation, so I don't dry corn down like a lot of people do. So I do a shorter season corn. So I actually have to watch the fertilizer rates based on it too, because it's going to time out. So I've been watching that, and I do pretty good, close to what the other guys are doing with full season. I just don't have the higher bushel yields because of that. But then I could cut my fertilizer rates back too. So I'm kind of playing around with both of those. They talk about less seed, more shade ability in that. It's kind of hard to do a lot of that with the weather changes that we have to try to stay consistently through these. And I've tried different methods of ground working, no-till, because I just, in this last maybe 3 years, I got a no-till drill where I've been drilling more instead of working the ground and then just using a regular drill to work the seed in. So I've been playing with a few different things on that. And like I told some of the other guys, it's a little easier for me because I don't work 100% on a farm. I work off the farm, and I buy a little more quality seed so I can kind of get around that, and then try to look at the duration of the time of the seed to do the fertilizer that way and try to match it the best I can. And I know soil sampling would be a better way, and I'm working my way towards that. It's just taking some time because I don't always have the time to get away from work to go do it. That makes it kind of tough. I've done that with the spraying. I don't have time to spray, so I just had the co-op go ahead and work on it. The problem is, being a smaller farmer like I am, I don't always get them to come out and do the smaller field. They like to group them together so they get more efficient on their fuel for mileage that they're doing. So I get a little suffer from that because I don't get the time of the spray during the time of the rain, and it's kind of off and on with that. But I have been playing around with a lot of that, and some of the things that they miss when they're doing their GPS, because they're so big equipment on smaller field. I run into some missed spots in the field, then I get some, I think, overlap in the spray. The problems that I run into with some of the no-till ideas is I don't like using harsh chemicals on my field. I like to stay as light as I can. And I try not to do too much of the no-till too much because I don't want the grasses and the weeds taking over in between the times I'm out there working, which I know people run into that too. Although I have not found a weed yet that can beat a hoe. A hoe can cut anything down. So, it's just, you got to have the time to do some of that stuff. But I have been playing with different methods in that. And I just got this new laptop, our unit I have to watch your videos and stuff. So I got to try to get a little more efficient with what I got going on. So I could try to put things in perspective and see what I'm missing to try to work it in that program.
Yeah.
Because I just got this in December, and I've been working with it with my videos and stuff like that. So I'm getting a little bit better at everything. So hopefully everything that you taught me and I've looked at can help different seasons and weather events that are going on pre-season versus postseason. Sometimes the rains come later. This last year I had planted seed and had a co-op come in, and I told them I had extend 2 beans on this side of the field and I had Roundup Ready beans on this side. Well, they sprayed straight across the field, everything that had Roundup when they sprayed didn't come up. And I had the overlap, and I had my overlap around the edge to compensate for overspray, and that all came up in that part of it.
Yeah.
And
There.
I had to replant about 13 acres out of that. And the sad part about that, I thought the early planting would be better, and the later planting actually did better because the rain timing was. You know, it got dry there where the seed, the plant come up, and then it didn't get anything for a while, and then it took off again. My yields were actually higher than in the same field than the other ones that I did earlier, which was kind of odd. I thought the earlier one for the longer duration of time would have been better, and it wasn't. I actually had a higher yield than my buddy next to me on that same field because of the later planting in it. And it just might have been the way the sun and the rain hit at that time to take that out of it.
Yeah, that timing is a big part of it on the beans, and when that rain, those late rains fall, that seems to really drive that. But you're right on the fertilizer management side. I mean, you have to figure what fits within your system, and you're thinking about it right. To okay, so this is where I am. You know, these are the things I can. You know, this maybe is the thing I adjust, or this is the thing I shift. So I think you're thinking about it exactly right as far as how you look at your system and what changes you want to make. So.
Yeah, I liked
Well,
Ryan.
Go
Or I
ahead.
was gonna say, I liked Ryan's sort of analogy of pulling levers, and there's only there's a lot of levers being pulled, but you only have control over a few of them. So it's good to know what levers you can pull and what levers you can't.
Yep.
I've used the stabilizers in the different ones for the granulated versus the side dress and the corn, and I have seen a lot of benefit with that to run my fertilizer out a little longer on the later seeds, and it has worked. Sometimes I think though it depends on the weather conditions going in on the drier stuff versus the later stuff, because it pulls it all the way through.
Yep.
And that.
Yep. Yeah. At the end of the day, the weather's still gonna dictate a whole lot of what's.
And you don't have control over.
No, you're not gonna have control, but we play the odds, right? And you protect what you can.
We just try to go from. We start here and we end here, and hopefully the weather falls where it's supposed to.
Yep.
So I do appreciate the input that you guys give out, though.
Excellent. All right,
Awesome.
Emily.
Well, I guess the last thing for this event before we kind of wrap it up is I just want to give a little plug. So as part of the St. Mary's project, there's a couple different working parts in the St. Mary's project, and one of them is sort of a social assessment. So in the beginning of this project, back in 2000 and I believe it was 18, we sent out a survey to a bunch of folks in the St. Mary's. And we also interviewed a lot of farmers. We interviewed a lot of conservation staff. So that's your NRCS folks, your soil and water folks, your extension folks, as well as some certified crop advisors who are working in the area. And both the surveys and those interviews sort of explored your attitudes and behaviors towards adopting these conservation practices that we're talking about. So as part of this project, at the end of this project, which is right about now, we'll be doing both of those again. So we'll be sending out a survey to a bunch of folks in the St. Mary's, sort of the same type of survey, and we will be comparing the results of this 2021 survey to the results of the 2018 survey to see if we can sort of identify areas that have improved, and sort of see where we're at after all of some of these events have been going on, and we've been working in the St. Mary's for a couple of years now. So we're trying to see if there's been any indication of social change. And we'll also be reaching out to a couple farmers in the area to ask them some questions and have a quick conversation about sort of what your attitudes are about these types of things and how you felt sort of these type of webinars went. If you have any suggestions to help us improve, or anything like that. So keep your eyes and ears out and keep your eye on your mailbox. And if you're lucky, I'll give you a call and see if you want to chat with me. But yeah, so I just want to give a little plug for that. And other than that, I think that's about it. We are at the end of our session, so at the end of these 6 St. Mary's Conservation webinars, and we're coming towards the end of the project. And I believe in the fall, we're going to be putting on sort of an end of project meeting. Hopefully, we're hoping that it'll be done in person up in the watershed, but we'll see how that works out, pending coronavirus and rules that we kind of have to follow as being part of Purdue. But we're keeping our fingers crossed for an in-person meeting, coffee and donuts, and
Not so much on the coffee, but I could do the donuts.
I'll drink your coffee.
I know, that's fine. I just drink regular water. I don't even do soda anymore. So
There you go. That's good. Keep it simple. Keep it simple.
yeah, it works for me. So I know my
Cool.
doctor gave me a hard time about it. He goes, I can't do that with soda. I said, oh, I give that up, and had a lot less sinus issues. So you
There
give
you
up
go.
something and learn something, keep on going.
There you go.
So
Well, yeah, thanks for spending some time with us, Walter.
okay, I
and
appreciate it. I
everybody.
appreciate input, because everything we do better. The equipment part that actually pushes 100% no-till and strip till costs a little bit more money than I got to spend right now. So I'm picking and choosing when I can. I started that when I went from my corn to my beans in a no-till situation, and then the wheat, same with that, back and forth, so I didn't have to do so much work. And I always end up with a little bit of a cover crop from the neighbors mowing so much that it just kind of blows in, and I get a free cover with the grasses and stuff. It always picks up the extra nitrogen, and I can see the benefit of that. I'm just trying to figure, just like you see in your soil maps, we have highs and lows that matter. Some no-till practices are probably better in these areas versus over here, different ground levels. So I'm working with that too and stuff, so I don't run into erosion. I'm trying to get around that. One of these fields I just bought has erosion issue that I'm trying to deal with. And I've been trying to take a lot less topsoil and a little harder clay and pack in the low areas. So when I work the ground, I can leave those areas alone so they don't move the soil. So I can stabilize it a little bit more. Of course, that's always weather related too. You get some good days and bad days to deal with that. So I'm working
Great.
forward to that, to see how that works out with the drill. And I've been playing a little bit more. We started out on the 7-inch and we jumped to 15. Every other rotor 2x2s versus some different ideologies there are spreading stuff out. I don't know that I can go to actual row crop fertilizing, because I'm not as sure I'm going to exactly make it right there, even though I do have GPS that I could possibly use with that, because it just don't ever work like that in a smaller field. Sometimes it's okay, and then other times you just get just off a little bit and it's all wrong. So I don't know that I can do that just yet, but I'm trying everything I can to see what works the best.
Yeah,
I've had some real
trial
good
and
years, and
error.
then I have some bad years too. So I'm sure we all have that with our conversations.
Absolutely. Cool. Well, thanks for showing up, Walter, and thanks for chatting with us. And if you have any questions, you know where to find us.
Yep.
And we will see you later.
All right. Glad that my video worked this time out.
Oh yeah, your
There
new
you go.
computer is working great.
It looks
All
good.
right. Thank you.
All right.
Bye bye.
Talk to you guys later.
Bye.